Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, I met with Pat Rose, the former Chief Financial Officer for the Transportation Security Administration here at the Prospect House in Washington, D.C. I had worked with Pat when I was the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Homeland Security, and together we had formed a great CFO partnership. I was honored to have had the opportunity to work alongside of him. Many people think of the Transportation Security Administration, or better known as TSA, as the professionals at the airport that check us through gate security and screen our bags. As you will hear, TSA is much more. Pat does a great job of providing an overview of their mission and his previous role as the top finance executive overseeing a $10.4 billion budget. In this episode, we'll discuss how the government plans and funds technology modernization and why that process normally takes 2 to 3 years to go from concept to execution. That is, of course, unless it's an urgent national priority like 9/11 or the pandemic. Many people that are new to doing business with the federal government often struggle to understand why it takes so long. Pat breaks this down. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Pat, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Troy. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, man, thank you so much for coming up to the Prospect House and doing this interview with me. I really appreciate it.
No, it is my pleasure. I'm a fan of the podcast. I've listened to your first 5 or 6 episodes that have been aired, and really insightful to me as a listener.
Thank you, Pat. I really appreciate that. And you are back in D.C. for a very short stint, as you had recently retired from the Department of Homeland Security, specifically TSA, and went on a great European trip. If people were here, they would see how much of a tan you got. It's almost embarrassing.
I tan easy, yes. It's a curse.
All righty. Well, hey, everybody. So what I would like to do, maybe, Pat, is a little bit of a story just to kind of introduce you to the listeners and kind of give a frame of reference from your former job as the CFO for TSA, or Transportation Security Administration.
Okay, so my background, I'm a proud Pittsburgh guy. I like to say I'm a Pittsburgh guy. Truth be told, is about 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, a little patch town known for coke ovens. And coke, if you don't know, is you take the coal, you burn it real hot, and that's what they used in the steel mills back in a heyday in Pittsburgh. Those coke ovens were gone 10 years or so before I was born, so it was a really just kind of small town where we all got together. We appreciated what we had, and we grew up just admiring the folks who worked hard.
That's great. And as you got ready to go off to college and finish your high school there, directly into the Air Force, or did you you were getting ready to go to college at that point?
Yeah, so I went to school at Robert Morris. Robert Morris was one of the 6 folks who signed both the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. He also financed the Revolutionary War. So I went back there because I did like business. I was fascinated with numbers. I wanted to be an accountant. I ended up getting a marketing degree after a couple years of heavy concentration in accounting. Graduated in 82, and again, this is the Pittsburgh area. In 82, it wasn't the best place to be looking for a job. So I did work for a couple years, not quite 2 years, in retail management. And it moved me around the country. I started off in Pittsburgh, went up to Rhode Island, and coincided with a neighbor of mine who was in the Rhode Island National Guard. Said, Pat, you have a degree, you could be an officer. And this was the same time as the Reagan buildup. And I bought into it. I liked the message that President Reagan was giving to the country of hope and pride. And so I jumped all in. I did not come from a military family. Pittsburgh is not a military town. I was already married. My wife and I didn't know what we were getting in for, but we said, let's give it a go. And 26 and a half years later, we retired. Looking back, not a single day we regret.
Wow. Now, you had quite an experience. You and I meet outside of work when we're both in, and continue to meet. And I know you've had experience. I know I had a duty station in Hawaii, but you've been in a lot of different places. You had a little bit of a background with some of the experience that you had in the military.
So we were probably about 13 places in the military. I could say I thought I did real well. I was surrounded by great people, great families that we got to know. And the Air Force itself is a leadership factory. If you're doing the right things and doing them in the right way, they're going to put you in the places where you're going to succeed, where they're going to challenge you, and they're going to see if you can do it. If you can, they're going to keep saying, okay, we'll throw more at Pat, see if you could take the next step. So it was a wonderful career. It culminated with a couple years in Hawaii as a CFO of Pacific Air Forces, which was a terrific assignment, terrific job. And the one thing about my 26 and a half year career is never deployed. And it was a matter of rank and what the FM folks did when they deployed. And the opportunities weren't always there, but I like to say that the budget battles are fought in the Pentagon. I had 2 tours in the Pentagon, a total of 7 years taking care of business there. So, again, very rewarding.
And FM, for all of the listeners, financial management.
Yes, sir.
So, yep. And then after you finished that great career in the Air Force, you moved on and moved in. You had to make the decision. And I will tell you, I just recently had another guest on, a veteran that is at the point you were at, where you had to make a decision: civil service, go into the commercial world, or potentially contract and try to make some more money than you made in the military. What drove you to civil service, and where was that first assignment?
So the first assignment was with Headquarters United States Marine Corps in the Pentagon.
Got it.
And I gravitated that because it was very similar to what I was doing with the Air Force. And I loved what I was doing with the Air Force. As crazy as it seems, I liked working in the Pentagon, right? Mm-hmm. It's the puzzle palace. You hear all kind of names for it. But when you get in the Pentagon and you work, especially budget issues, because the building is a lot about money and resources, you work with the best folks, working day and night to get the best product for the American people and to use taxpayers' dollars the best. And just a lot of hard work with it. So that job matched up neatly with my job skills. We were familiar with the area. I didn't mind working at the Pentagon. And I wanted to try to stay away from the Air Force for that first assignment out of the Air Force and being retired. Mm-hmm. And so the Marine Corps was a good fit. And they treated the Air Force guy very well.
Yeah. After you finished a couple years there working for the Marine Corps, you eventually make a transition to TSA. And this isn't where our paths intercepted, but the fact is like within the TSA movement, or the Transportation Security Administration, you end up being the CFO there and are able to accomplish a pretty significant credential in the federal government. Only 1% of all the federal government make it to SES, or the Senior Executive Service. Can you talk about that journey and how that went down?
Yeah, so when I was with the Marine Corps and just looking at their hierarchy of positions and who they have in order, I really did think if I wanted to be a senior executive, it would have to be outside the Marine Corps. They had great people that they were grooming for it, and I understand that, and that's completely fine. The opportunity came up at Transportation Security Administration, which headquarters was right across the street from the Pentagon. So it didn't require logistically, if I got the job, any much of a difference with how I got to work and when I got to work and all that stuff. So I put the package together. It's a pretty rigorous process. You have to put together, 10 pages worth of ECQs, executive qualities, that a independent board reviews to see if you've done things in your career that makes you worthy of being a senior executive. So I put that together, and TSA saw it. They liked what they saw on the resume, and then I went in and talked to them, and then they offered me the position. I was probably the first person in TSA to jump into that type of leadership position, it was pretty high up in the organization.
Correct.
That didn't grow up in the organization. TSA was a fairly new organization. They were building from the bottom up into their leadership ranks. It was fortunate for me, the structure of the CFO didn't have that natural replacement in place. And so I was able to jump in and fill that void for them. And I am glad they took a risk on me, and it paid off for both of us, I think.
Yeah. When you get into looking at the Transportation Security Administration, it's interesting is that a lot of people say, hey, government, go slow. But when you look at how TSA was formed in 2001, you see 9/11, which is, obviously September, and then you see basically the Transportation Security Act that established happening in November. So literally 2 to 3 months to create one of the most significant organizations. I would be holding back if I didn't also say all of DHS being created as the nexus while this is going on. The important thing that I wanted to make sure as we start to lay some of the foundation pieces into this episode is that Transportation Security Administration, one of 23 components of the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, but a very, very big one. And again, the components are kind of broken up into two types of components: the operational components, which TSA, and then support components might be the Office of Public Affairs or legal or stuff like that. But what I was hoping you might be able to do is to give people an appreciation of the Transportation Security Administration. A lot of people, they go to the airport and they're like, those are the people that give me a hard time when I have to go check through at the airport, or they handle my bags. But maybe you can give a perspective too of the organization that you came in to be the CFO for.
Sure, absolutely. And that same perspective that most people have of TSA, I did before I started researching into, do I want to work for this organization? So TSA, though, is much more than what you see at the airport. Now, what you see at the airport is a lot. TSA is probably the federal agency that reaches out and has the most interaction with the American public by far. Over 2 million passengers a day that we see go through the checkpoints. When I first got there, the average was about 1.6. It's probably up to about 2.1 now. 2.1 million people a day going through the checkpoints. But besides that, TSA is also responsible for not only the security at the airports, but all transportation modes. So that would be the rail system, that would be the train system, that would be the pipelines, and it's the security, not the safety aspect of it. Safety aspect, you might have Department of Transportation, or you have the FAA also with Department of Transportation, but the security aspect of it. And so it's pretty far-reaching. It also has a pretty sophisticated way of vetting folks. So everyone who gets on an airplane, behind the scenes, there's some algorithms that are run that make sure that that the person is going to be a low-risk traveler, and so they get the appropriate screening as they get on the airplane.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of the stories, especially in the days of YouTube, you wouldn't know there was selective screening for some of those people that get on. But it was interesting is that my observation was, especially being the CFO of Homeland Security, I would, through your assistance, you would help me have a better appreciation. I know I would meet with all the CFOs, and they would kind of allow me to see behind the scenes to where all the money goes. And, it was interesting, the baggage handling, the amount of technology that is within TSA, and the investment required to kind of maintain that level of national security and protecting commerce along the way. So I just thought that was pretty incredible. Talk about just a little bit of your role as a CFO and how that butted up against the leadership of TSA. And because a lot of people would always ask me, Troy, the CFO, it seems like you were always doing a lot of stuff with the office, with the secretary at that level. Your equivalent of the secretary would be the administrator for TSA, who we both know, very great guy. And talk a little bit about kind of your organizational throw and what the responsibilities would be as being the CFO, so people get an idea of the magnitude of what you had on your hands.
Okay, so TSA is about a $10 billion organization. We get funding from both Congress in terms of appropriated dollars. We also get funding from a lot of the passenger fees that come through. We collect about $4.5 billion a year from the passenger fee. And for the listeners, every time you fly, it's $5.60 that you contribute to TSA's organization. And I'll get into that a little bit later. Sure. It's not solely TSA's organization that 560 goes to, but so we manage that $10.4 billion with 4 divisions. We have a budget shop, a large accounting shop. We have a revenue shop that tracks that $4.5 billion. And we have your basic admin support type office. So about 140 strong. We have maybe a couple dozen contractor support augmentees. And, we work the budget from the beginning of the programming phase all the way through execution. And so what we have grown in TSA, and I like to think through a lot of my leadership while I was there, is we created a PBBE process. PBBE means planning, so that means just the strategic outlook. Where does leadership want the organization to go? And then once that plan is in place, programming means you put those dollars against the plans, the strategic objectives that you want. And that's still about 2 years out of the actual budget being prepared, which is the next phase, preparing the actual budget. You get your top line, you get your bogey number from the department that says, okay, here's how much you have to spread out between all your requirements. And then Congress will appropriate dollars and you execute it. So our organization takes it from the programming phase all the way through execution.
So as you go through that process, and you look at that, like you said, you get appropriated dollars. A little bit of the misconception, I think, even I'm in the consulting industry within the federal space. There's a lot of people that look at that process and think, hey, there's a lot of potential modernization and stuff that needs to kind of take place within the context of the department. But something that is a very big modernization or some sort of a large investment, and I could say modernization might even be just new baggage handling or x-ray machine technology, takes quite a while based on that process you just described in a generic sense. Talk a little bit about the timing that you're talking about there.
So the timing, just the process, and again, I just explained that PBBE process, which by itself is just pretty lengthy. Mm-hmm. That means you have to think about it. You have to assess it. You have to say, okay, if we're going to modernize, what equipment are we going to buy? How are we going to go out with the procurement of it? How are we going to test it? And then you get to buy it after all that stuff happens. So it is a pretty long process before you could actually go out and get what you want to get.
And when you say long, just give the listeners outside of DC kind of an idea of what long is. I mean, in general sense, because I've tell people 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, I'm going to say 3 years.
Yeah.
Now, our administrator, he's the current administrator, very astute with the budget process from his time with the Coast Guard. And his challenge to us was to accelerate that timeline. All right, and so that was not us, CFO. It was the whole of TSA, because contracting is involved, the acquisition community is involved, the operational folks are involved, because all this has to come together, because it's no one person or no one office's vote on this is what we're doing. It's a combination of different input from all those different offices that you need to make sure you're buying the right product in the right amount, as low as price as possible, that's going to actually get the job done. TSA did a good job. When I got there in 2014, we were talking about new equipment at the checkpoints. It took until about 3 or 4 years before the administrator was like, let's get it done. Let's put money in the budget. Let's do the testing for it. And we finally started deploying the CTs, the computed topography machines at the airports. They work like a CAT scan. They go through, they see through the bags. And the CATs, which are the authentication technique at the checkpoints that allows you just to show your ID and get through and get on the airplane. So those are a couple of the things we rolled out probably in like 2019, 2020. They were on the books before I got the TSA in concept. It took that long. And again, it takes some leadership, I think, to say, yeah, I know it's hard. I know there's a lot of input, but let's settle down and get it done and deploy this to the airports.
You and I started getting involved with DHS 2019 and 20, and that's when we kind of ended up working together. And you were in the middle of a process with headquarters. And when I say headquarters, I mean DHS, the actual headquarters for all of this, of doing a finance systems modernization. And at that point, just by happenstance, that was the same time your organization was one of the go-lives that would happen that year. And before you, CWMD, the counter weapons of mass destruction, that organization. So you were like the true first test of modernization. And it was interesting to see your leadership through that process and being one of the first, knowing that, you have such an important mission. We were always concerned that we didn't want to throw the mission off. And even today, DHS is getting ready to do FEMA and ICE. And FEMA, for example, very similar situation is they get very positively saying this, but they get distracted with national emergencies when they have operational good intent to modernize and do stuff. And so, maybe you can talk a little bit about that journey of modernization in the face of really priorities that sometimes become national priorities and trying to keep the organization focused.
Okay, so in 2014 is when TSA and the department, along with the Coast Guard and CWMD, the organization you just mentioned, entered into agreement with another government agency for shared service provider. Right? So they had gone through and decided this agency would provide the financial services for us. Not the right decision. They were way too small for it's a huge, complex, complicated system that TSA operates on when we do our accounting. The Coast Guard is even 3-4 times more complex. So it took about 2 years for both sides, the DHS, TSA side, and the shared service provider side, to come to agreement that it wasn't going to work. So changed gears, and we kind of had it managed through the department more than a shared service provider, because we knew what we needed more than someone else, and we wanted to be responsible and accountable for getting this done. The department did not have a good history in transitioning. I think they had failed once or twice or maybe 3 times before. And this was hey, department, you got to get it right this time. And that's coming from the appropriators to Congress and other interested parties. So we did change course, and we got the department more heavily involved. We had a joint program management office at the department, and I think that's where you came in when it was at the joint program aspect of it, and it was a realization of, okay, let's see what's going on. Let's take it step by step and understand where the pain points are, what's possible, and can we get to the end game without sacrificing the end product, and are there things that we could kind of give up as we go through? Because everybody, when you build a new system, you want it to be inclusive of everything possible. You want to just click your fingers and it happens. It gets to be very expensive. It gets to be very hard. Mm-hmm. And so we deliberately had to pull back from some of those aspects of what we were doing to make it a little bit more manageable. And so that process went through, and it took us about 2 years once we kind of revamped how we were going to manage it. And it was a big decision to go live with it because the department had a clean audit opinion. There was great concern that if we went to a new financial system, we would lose a clean audit because that first year, how you process the transactions, how you're able to pull reports and pull the audit data that the auditors are looking at will make it a difficult process, and you won't be able to show them that you can do things consistently time after time in the way it was supposed to. But hey, we got it done that first year. We had very few NFRs, notice of findings, and we kept a clean audit opinion. We were very excited about it. A lot of hard work, teamwork went into that, but we got it done.
Yeah, no, that was a great experience, and even working with the administrator at the end, it was doing that type of work in the Fortune 500 for many years myself. You always, you really never think about kind of briefing the leader and telling them, hey, we're about ready to do something, could really throw a disruption into this. And so, I know when you and I first started getting together, it's like we need to bring the boss in. And even on the secretary side, to let them know, hey, look, we have an operational project that could be considered elective that's taken many years and has a high visibility within the industry. Industry was watching this. It was one of the first pure tasks, again, being the CFO, DHS had been on the high-risk list almost from its inception with the GAO, or the General Accounting Office, which meant it got extra scrutiny by the GAO to evaluate all of these limitations. So it's a $90 billion budget in total. Yours is 10.4 of that. When that much money is going through something, the GAO wants to make sure that there's controls in place. So everything you were talking about, there's just a lot riding on it. And I think after it went live again through your leadership, and I'd also say, with Stacy and Shannon, all the people that kind of, and everybody on your staff, this set a tone of what's possible, and it kind of took a little bit of the fear out. So I thought that was really good. And I guess as we kind of transitioned from the job as CFO and looked at some of the experiences that you had in there, I thought that maybe one of the topics that we could talk a little bit about is modernization, kind of in the context of the federal government. We're living right now in a super exciting period where ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, and I'm at a company right now that is, they're at ground zero trying to kind of take it out there. I fly between DC and Los Angeles, and and everywhere in between. I'm on the road 90% of the time, and the perception about the federal government, and I thought maybe you can lend some at least some contrast or context to this, is why doesn't the federal government jump on this and make this happen like really quickly? And I will also say that I'm in an industry in consulting where federal consulting is a lot different than Fortune 500 commercial consulting. I gave you an example, again, maybe over another beer discussion that you and I've had outside of here, which is, I could come up with a point of view of how to help an entertainment company or an industrial products company on how to do something, and work with their executives, put together a business case, take it, through their executive steering committees, potentially to the board, and get it hatched. And it could be $100 million potential opportunity of consulting, but it could save them, $300 million. And so the business case pays for itself, and everybody's motivated to do it. And even if they handicapped it, it could still be only $200 million. It's $100 million, and that's forever, every year. In the federal government, you hear a lot of issues with, it's hard to hire people right now. There's not enough workers out there. Budgets are going to get tighter, especially as spending kind of ramped up. Now it's going the other direction. Set an expectation when you start looking at modernization ideas. You and I use this theoretical $100 million theoretical modernization project. And you come up with this either internally within your group, or you put out to the market, hey, I'm trying to figure my way through that. You mentioned a bit ago a time frame of about 3 years. You also mentioned 2014 coming in and having the CT machines end up taking almost 6 years to come to. But break it down a little bit more into the blocks from a good idea to help people that might be in the consulting industry or that deal with the federal government that don't understand the funding or the appropriations or the budgeting process of what it takes. Take that to the next level, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. So let's just take an example of a CT machine, because we've talked about that. it's demonstrated technology. It's out there. It's used in another form, but it can be used potentially to screen bags as they go through checkpoints. Someone has that idea. It's an idea. There's no money in the budget for it. And just say it goes through and you start talking with your contracting folks, your acquisition pros, and you start understanding, what will this look like? Okay, for those CT machines, there's 440 airports TSA has. Each of them have several lanes. There's going to be 2,000 of these machines. Rough order of magnitude, because we kind of know they're already out there. They're going to be, maybe 100 million to 250 million each to buy, and then there's installation costs. It's going to be a big bill. All right. So you get through the big bill, and before anything happens, then you have to go through the appropriate approval processes. So anything that large is not going to be solely a TSA decision. It is going to go to the department. The department's going to run it through their machinery to make sure that it fits the needs, it's the right thing, it's not overkill, it's not unnecessary. So that all takes time, all right? And then you start getting the flags that says, okay, we want to do this. And just say we think it's $100 million. If you're fortunate enough to be able to lay out $100 million 3 years from now, what happens over time in federal budgets is that $100 million is going to erode. Because as you get closer to execution year, there's other priorities that pop up. And they're going to need money for these things that you never thought of. So that $100 million is going to be 90 because 10 million has to go towards, pick a problem. And so the money aspect of it starts dwindling down too. And then that means it's going to take longer for you to reach FOC, full operational capability, with these machines at all the airports. And then let's back up then. So you get the money in the budget for a limited number of machines. You're going to have to buy just a few. You're going to have to run it through testing. We have a pretty nice building.
It's the Freedom Center?
Yeah, no, not the Freedom Center. It's the TSIF out by DCA Airport. And where we test internally to TSA, okay, does this work right? You bring in a couple TSOs, Transportation Security Officers, let them play around with it, see if it feels right, if the logistics of working it are awkward. And that's going to take about a year. Once that happens and you again demonstrate it, it takes time to brief the department. Hopefully the department's ready when you're ready, or they could say, hey, you know what, brief us next month because we're all booked. So then you take these limited numbers, you go to the airports. The airports then in a true operational setting will go through it with live passengers and you'll monitor it to see does it slow down throughput. That's very important, right? No one wants it to take much longer to get through the checkpoint than it already does. And ideally, modernization, in theory, means you're doing something that should accelerate that. It should be more efficient. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's the security aspect that we're after, right? Not just the efficiency. We're looking for, can it detect a smaller amount of a bad substance that the other one couldn't? So it'll go through that phase, and then once you're done with that, then you could go and put as much money as you have into the budget for it. And sometimes that money, as I said, is eroded and it's gone. At least to a great degree. TSA, I talked about that passenger fee, $5.60. We collect about $4.5 billion a year in those fees. The first $250 million of that passenger fees does go to a set-aside fund called the Aviation Security Capital Fund. And that is a set amount that TSA knows it has to work with, primarily for the checked baggage systems that are in all the airports. To buy the big machinery that no one sees under the airport, it's like a big erector set.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool to watch the bags go through here, and if it goes through one of the big explosive detective systems and it flags something, it's going to kick the bag out to the right, where it's looked at by TSOs. If it's fine, it just keeps going, through its, could be a mile or so of just track.
I got to say, just one part I'll insert there, Pat. So you set up a trip for me to go to DCA or to Dulles. And it was like seeing something I had no idea that existed. It's like the city under the street. You know, it was unbelievable. And as a finance guy, I just kept thinking, whoa, this is really a lot of capital spend that goes on down here.
Right, and most of that was financed from the passenger fee, because that first 250 goes to the Aviation Security Capital Fund. Until recently, we've used that fund only for the checked baggage. We haven't used it for anything at the checkpoints because of the way the congressional language was written, and we weren't sure if we had leeway. We went through it with the lawyers and counsel, and we decided that, okay, we could do in limited instances, use some of that money at the checkpoints, which was important for us because, again, that's the only amount of money that we knew we were getting. Sometimes, the budgets will be built, and again, the money has to go to different areas. Sometimes we're fortunate, Congress, we get good support for them. They want the airports to be as secure as possible. They might add money to our budget so we could go out and buy more. Again, that's done late in the game, so you can't buy it as soon as they say it's ready because you're not really prepared for it. It takes a while to gin up all the documentation to get that equipment at the airports. So it's a pretty long process that's driven by policy. It is driven by funding. It's driven by time and competing interest across the department, across all of government as the Congress decides how much each sub-appropriation is going to get.
You know what, I'd add into this, and I think the current administrator is really savvy at this, but, in my job as the DHS CFO, like I would deal with you in a very positive way, you and the administrator on what your budget request would be. Like you said, it's a clearinghouse and the priorities looked at. I'd have ICE coming in, I'd have the Coast Guard, to have, Secret Service, all of the different organizations. And the thing that I realized that was pretty important for me, I just did not have a full appreciation is everything you just explained was what was happening on your side to keep that timeline going. At the department level, we may have needed money for the border. We may have needed money for the wall. We may have needed, something, a Coast Guard cutter. And like you said, there was needs, and so you would serve up exactly what you thought you needed. You had to game it a little bit because there was also discretion at the department level. Because after it would come to my office, they would move on to the deputy secretary through that DMAG process, and they would get ready for the secretary. And all along the way, if there was a problem across DHS, which there was a lot of, we would have to tax the different departments or different agencies like TSA and say, hey, look, I know you had 10.4 billion, but it's got to be 10.1 because we need 300 million and we need to do it equally and we need to kind of be able to kind of budget, for whatever. And what I noticed, the department heads and the CFOs that were really squared away, like that's why I got to go out in the field so much, is like they would make that issue something I was very familiar with, because sometimes after everything's pitched, it's the discussion I would end up having with the secretary or the deputy to say, hey, we need to stay focused on this, because you can make a $300 million discussion in an afternoon there when you're dealing with 90 billion. It's that easy, and you can't make it that easy. And you guys were masters at keeping it hard.
No, well, in reality, it is hard because that 10.4 billion, just say 7 billion of that is salary.
Yep.
All right, and so no one wants to say, okay, if I give you this $300 million, I'm going to have to lay people off or RIF them.
Right.
No one will want, okay, so that 7 billion is off the table. So now you're down to 3 billion. 300 million and 3 billion is, it's a nice percentage at that point that you're going to get hit. Out of that 3 billion, you've got another, probably 2 billion tied up in the must-do contracts, whether they're leases at airports for the space, because we have to pay for our space at the airports, or if we have offices where the federal air marshals are off base or off airport property. So that you take that 2 million, put it aside, all right? Then you look at the next tranche of requirements for TSA, which would be the travel that we do. We do a lot of travel with the federal air marshals, are part of TSA.
Correct.
So they fly global missions, all right? you can't not do those, and so you take that money off the table. Pretty soon, you're really looking at a cut of like 50% or some of what's available, and it's just not doable.
Yeah.
And sometimes, if you could figure out before the budget's produced, that's good. You have time to think about it. Sometimes, as you know, this is execution year problem.
Yep.
And halfway through the year, when you've already got your plans on how you're going to spend your money, that 50% then becomes like 90%. And I will say, the department has always been good with TSA. Not that the department always did what TSA suggested, but they understood why we were suggesting it. And if it made sense from a enterprise perspective and a customer experience perspective from the airport security experience at the airport, we might find some negotiation in there, some way to kind of buy the bill down.
Yeah, it's interesting is that when I look through presidential transition and different roles within the offices, a lot of those people that are making those decisions are politicals, not career people. And so they're also getting direction. We'd get direction a lot from the White House on stuff through OMB. And so we're trying to make decisions. And I think, the thing that was really helped me sleep at night is a lot of people have an impression of, DC being very political, and there's no doubt it is. But down deep inside, whether they were career or political, they had the country's best interests at heart. And I think that was a part that was reaffirming to me. And those weren't always really good, easy discussions. I mean, I'm saving this podcast episode because you just explained how you would always get out of trying to make TSA, be able to contribute, because you had a story that was, bulletproof, and everybody, so then you're picking between your kids. At some point, it's really tough, but those priorities aren't going away that have to be evaluated. So it's an interesting thing. But I guess when I talk about transition, like some of those key, I'll call it management roles that are a part of an administration are really important. And I'm not just talking to the CFO, the Undersecretary of Management, the administrator that's fighting for something that may have done like you did when you went into TSA. Admiral Pukowski was an admiral in the Coast Guard. So he didn't have a lifetime developing himself in TSA. You would never know it when you talk to him because he bleeds that stuff, and it was hard to get around his conviction towards things. But I think that it was definitely something and it took people like yourself of coaching and real teamwork. So I thought the listeners would think that would be pretty interesting to see how that process worked. And I guess, Pat, just to put kind of a point on modernization for the listeners, that's where we started with this, is you just explained a pretty complex, long plan, a process that takes place to get something really important to the market. And again, I would say to the listeners, the newest technologies you're hearing about, when it seems like it's easy, why don't the government just do it tomorrow? Think about what was just said and realize, I think at this point, unless it's a national emergency, this is the path that takes a while for things to go. The other thing I would say as an observation is that, when being a mayor of a small city, people would say, Troy, you're the mayor, you can make these decisions tomorrow and just fix stuff. And I found out in that process, it was a long one like you're talking about. And people are like, doesn't that make you frustrated? You're in the corporate world where you can make decisions really quick. And I said, I think that's healthy, because it slows stuff down enough, not paralyzing it, but to make sure the government isn't following shiny things, isn't, having people come in and over-influence a process and take this really machine called the U.S. government that needs to operate efficiently into a more methodical, sometimes it seems chaotic, but the guardrails are there. I don't know what your view of that is. And it was funny, if you listen to the discussion I had with Ryan Levitt, he did not believe, that's inefficiency, and inefficiency costs a ton of money. But I think the other side, I don't know if your perspective is the same.
No, I think, you certainly have to go into any huge investment of the taxpayers' money with eyes wide open, and be pretty darn sure that you're going to spend it on something that makes sense, that your neighbor would want you to spend those dollars on, that the person working behind the counter at the food establishment you went at, that you're spending those dollars wisely for him or her as well. But I do think there is probably some balance in there that someone could find, and I think a lot of smart people are always looking at how to find that balance. So hopefully we'll get there where there's a way to get demonstrated technology to the field quicker. And that's the policy process part of it. The other part that concerns me as a CFO always is the money part of it, right? So just say we are successful. Hey, everybody says we could do it tomorrow. And there is no 9/11 crisis that says here's a supplemental which gives you additional dollars outside your budget. To find those dollars in your current year budget, depending on the price, is going to be very hard. The next year's budget is already probably over at Congress. They're debating on it. You may be able to influence them to add a little bit to the appropriation when you get it. Otherwise, you're still looking at, okay, it's 2 years from now where I could be in control of the money that goes against this thing that we all just now slapped the table and said, yeah, let's do it. So it's a pretty fascinating system we have built. And again, I think for the right reasons, for what you just mentioned, so we don't just jump into something. But it is a good process to be part of when you get the end product at the airports, or you get a financial system that is producing financial reports every month that you give to the auditors that they say, yep, that is what we're looking for. You did it right. Mm-hmm. There is a great deal of satisfaction that goes along with it.
Yeah. So Pat, as we get ready to kind of close off the discussion here, I was just kind of curious, you looked at all of the transformation that you did in large organization, and I thought what might be helpful for the listeners is, do you have any advice on how to lead transformational change across significant organizations? It doesn't have to be TSA. It could be your church. It could be a small business. It could be a big part of a department in a corporation. But any thoughts on leading these types of transformation?
Yeah, so one is one that you mentioned earlier, and I want to thank you for. So communication is key. Communication to your leadership is key. So when you came down and you talked to Administrator Pekoski about what we were trying to do, and hey, it's not foolproof. There could be some hiccups with it. That goes a long way. I could say it, and it goes this far. If you come in and reinforce that, then it adds credibility. So I want to thank you for that. But that part, I think, is really important to make sure your leadership knows, your colleagues know, your customers in the organization know, because they're all going to be impacted by transformation somehow. And then as best as you can, and it depends on the modernization, wherever it is to inform the clients or the customers. Okay, this is going to be new. You're going to see this. Part of the big challenge for us when we got our financial system going, and I would imagine for any new system, is the training involved to get folks well versed in how to operate or how to communicate with the system and work it. So that's a big. You have to make sure that you have that change management part of it done. So change management, communication with leadership, communication with the clientele. So I would say those, are probably the most important.
Let me ask you something, Pat. People, when I talk to them, that are getting ready to take on a big role, and sometimes it's take on an organization, but let's keep it in the context of a program or a project. They're like, when you do something and you put yourself out there, I always think of things like a scoreboard, right? And, there's wins and losses. There's not draws. You either are successful in what you're doing, and, something that I used to find very interesting in consulting to the Fortune 500 at some of the highest levels of the Fortune 500 is, failures or losses can also mean people lose their job at the highest levels. You spend $100 million of somebody's money and it doesn't go good. You might get a second chance at that level because you probably have a few of those plays in motion. But if you have 3 L's at the end of that, you will soon not have that job because, a component of leadership is you need to be able to kind of drive change because things don't stay static. And so anything that you would be able to kind of give to folks that are sitting on the periphery that are so afraid of that loss that they won't step into trying to even take on the challenge, because over your career, there was many times, especially as you got many years into it, you didn't really have a choice. You needed to kind of go. But I'm talking maybe you at the very beginning of that, when you knew you're kind of pushing into a big bet.
So I think there is a great value and respect for the person, the organization that takes on what they know is going to be a very challenging project, and they don't run away from it. Sometimes you look for, volunteers or somebody, and you need to be that person who holds his or her hand up and say, you know what, I'll give it a go. I think, I'm as good as the next guy. Or I'll work it hard. So you can't be afraid of that. And again, if you fail, and you just mentioned, you might be able to have a 1 or 2 L's in that, because if you're also communicating along the way correctly, people are going to understand that it's not easy, it's complicated. And as long as you can learn from the failure and you could apply it to the next step or the next modernization, whatever it may be, people are going to appreciate that. And it's not all, we're not all going to be, 20-game winners, sometimes you're a 20-game loser, and you're still a valuable part of the starting rotation. I'm talking baseball here, folks.
Oh, you are. I know. I didn't think I'd coach you into that, but
no.
Done.
Because you know that every 4 or 5 days you're going to go out there and give them what they need, right? And so don't be afraid of failure, especially for the hard project. People know they're hard, and I, for one, will always pick that person who has demonstrated, I just don't want the easy stuff. I'll take the hard stuff too, and we'll battle through this together, and we'll commiserate together, and then at the end, hopefully, we high five together.
That's awesome. Well, hey, Pat, I really appreciate you taking the time and your trip up here to DC with you and your wife. And I'm looking forward this evening for you and I getting together and taking our beautiful wives out to dinner and really getting back and talking about some of the times that we've had together. I thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me again. I'm very honored to be on your show. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.